Hence.
Do you feel it's a pecuniary? Yes, it is a pecuniary interest, and you will be leaving?
Potentially pecuniary, and that's right, yes.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to confirm. Thank you. Are there any other ones?
Madam Mayor,
Yes?
I am an employee of Transgrid.
Thank you. So you will be not participating?
I think for this matter I will not be participating.
Right, okay, so you will be leaving that meeting as well as Councillor Turner. Councillor Jones.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I would like to declare an insignificant pecuniary interest in 6.2 and 9.3. The reason that I want to alert councillors to this issue is that both the developer's real estate agent and one of the submissions against it have casually advertised in the newspaper which I own, and also for 9.3, HumeLink have also casually advertised their community engagement strategy in the organisation that I own. I'll be staying and voting.
Thank you.
Just a clarification.
Can I just ask, I just got a message saying that there's people in the waiting room trying to get into the link.
Okay.
Is that as in is
The recording
Zoom link,
might not be live streamed, Ali, and that's what I was going to ask as well. I can't actually see the meeting being recorded.
Just a quick one. If it's a pecuniary interest, you have it's not insignificant or significant. It's just a pecuniary interest, and you must leave.
Okay.
So
If it's so you might want to rethink
What I'm
what
declaring
you're declaring
Okay.
if you wish to stay and vote.
Okay.
So Fleur sent me one saying she can't get into Zoom, but then she's not supposed to be watching it on Zoom. It's supposed to be on YouTube.
It's on our website. Do you want me to send her a link?
So it's not a personal pecuniary interest. It's the organisation that I own. I don't feel like this would influence me at all. So I wanted to flag this, like, with my councillors because fellow councillors, because they're aware that I'm associated with that organisation. I don't believe that this is a direct personal pecuniary interest.
I'm telling you that it's a remoteness.
Yeah, I want to alert you to the remoteness of the issue. But I think in talking about it, you understand what my position is and why I'm staying. Okay, thank you.
So thank you. Just for confusion and clarity, I've just sent Fleur a text saying that the meeting is on YouTube, not Zoom.
I've sent her an email.
Okay, if you could send her an email, that would be fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, any other declarations of pecuniary interest or special disclosures at this stage? For anybody online, I can't see you, so you'll have to call out. Okay, I'll just take it that there's just no others. So if we could move to the confirmation of the minutes of the ordinary council meeting on the 25th of August. If I could have a mover, Councillor Turner and Councillor Reid, I can see up there, thank you. All those in favour? I think that's everybody. Thank you. I don't think there are any items that came out of that meeting that needed additional follow-up that haven't been followed up or are being followed up in other reports from my read. We've just got the 4 items in Director of Planning reports. Would you just like to go through them one at a time, or some of them we could knock off quicker? Well, I think
Madam Mayor, I would suggest it's probably easier to go through one at a time, noting some of them have been seen as contentious.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll just move to item 6.1, the draft filling policy. We've had some presentations today and various questions and information. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to advise councillors that this be our stance tonight, that we reject the adoption of the policy in favour of council facilitating a roundtable forum with stakeholders a further investigation of options and policy review.
I'll second that, Madam Mayor.
Fellow councillors, just briefly, we've got a lot to gain from getting this right, and we've got a lot to lose if we don't. We have such a robust policy in our heavy haulage policy that I now feel we have a new standard, a new bar that I want to reach with this policy, and I don't feel like we're there yet. Some of the ideas that have come forward in very detailed submissions don't work because they're not a good fit with the rest of Yass Valley. But there are a lot of good ideas that I'd like to explore. If not that way, how else could we do it? And a lot of ideas have come forth through community organisations where they've taken a lot of time to put submissions in. We've had the opportunity to do a few policies this way, and one's going to be presented shortly, which will, I think next month, which will be the affordable housing strategy, where we had a forum, we had all the stakeholders in the room, and the opportunity to bounce ideas off, to see what stuck and what was good in the eyes of the stakeholders, the people that are up against this issue constantly, was so good for the councillors in that room watching this. And I anticipate a policy that is very robust and reflective of the needs of our community. That's what I want for us in this one, and I think we can go a step further. I don't envy the challenge of our planning staff having to use a tool that can be applied to such different situations in our community. We've got agricultural industry in some sections, and we've got filling operations which are vulnerable to the ACT. So we've got such a broad problem that I think we can do a lot if we get all of these people in the room. And when I say stakeholders who will be impacted by this policy, I do mean stakeholders. We need our farmers in the room at the same time as we have the residents who are being impacted by this, so everyone can see who's impacted, and we get a broad understanding of what we can adopt, particularly in other council areas. I think there's still a few ideas that we can pick up from other areas as well.
So in terms of a resolution, we need to, a motion, you need to, I'm presuming you're saying defer consideration of this matter pending a forum?
Yes, so my words are defer the adoption of the policy in favour of council facilitating a forum, a stakeholder forum, further investigation of options and policy review.
Could I make a suggestion? I'm not saying I agree with it, but defer adoption of the policy in favour of, rather than in favour of, you have pending council facilitating, please, because it
Go for it.
that it's sort of
It's one word, not three.
well, makes more sense in the read, I think.
Councillor Jones and Councillor Furry.
Councillor Furry.
Yep.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, am I able to briefly speak to that as a seconder?
Yes, I can. I can't see anybody on screen, so you'll have to call out.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, who's that?
Michael.
Madam Mayor, if the wording of the motions is that it just lay on the table pending the forum, if nothing comes out of the forum, you can pick the report straight up again.
Rather than deferring.
I keep reminding you
like
that pending it requires you to pick it up off the table. It's easy to defer procedurally.
Right.
For you guys.
Yeah, but if you let it lie on the table, it requires council at a council meeting to pick it up. My suggestion has been you defer consideration pending whatever you want to do. And that way we implement the forum in this case, and then we bring back the results of that forum to council, which may or may not change what you've previously been shown.
Righto, all right, I'll accept that.
It's administratively easier for orders.
So now that I can see councillors online,
Righto.
Councillor Harker has her hand up. I'll go to Councillor Harker first, then Councillor Reid. Councillor Harker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I very much support us doing this as thoroughly and detailed as possible, and support the recommendation and all the discussion that's gone on between the councillors up to here. You know, taking into consideration the presenters and the people who've emailed and called us. I just wanted to clarify that, and I think the conversation is heading that way, that if we don't have a policy on the table at the moment, you know, what sort of time frame this would be and what the risk is in not having anything actually in place. But I think where we're getting to is this wouldn't be a long drawn out process. It would be a workshop, and we could actually continue on finalising the policy in, I'm presuming, a couple of months.
Well, no,
We won't.
I don't think you'll be finalising the policy, mainly because to organise a forum, the October council meeting is your last decision-making forum. It's more likely going to be early next year before you actually have any sort of policy position in place following that forum. So in the interim period, the staff could use it as a draft policy in consideration of any proposal, but it wouldn't have any. It doesn't have that official status, so it's sort of a tear down, if you like, from the adopted policy. Well, it would be a matter for consideration, but not necessarily binding if a matter ended up in court.
Okay, thanks. I just think it's something we need to be conscious of, is the time frame before this would come in, or a version thereof this.
Yeah.
Councillor Reid's next, then Councillor Frost, then Councillor Furry.
Yeah, I think you've addressed some of the questions that I had, but one of the questions was, do we need extra funding to get further advice, somebody to draft this up in a more substantial way? And if so, should we put that as part of this, so that we would vote some funds towards it?
Councillor Reid, I think the easiest approach at this point in time is, if this motion gets up, is to facilitate the stakeholder forum. If there is a need for more detailed work to be prepared, then that needs to come back to council for an allocation of funding. If we need to get, say, a legal advice or an expert in pulling the policy together, that's something we would certainly need to do. It's this at the moment, policy is being developed in-house by staff, but if you want extra expert advice to advise you on the policy, then that's a resourcing matter that we need to bring back to council. But I would do it in two steps: stakeholder forum first, see where that takes you, then determine whether you need expert advice.
Thank you. I just have a further one. That we're using the word policy when my feeling is that what we're dealing with here is a sort of overarching guideline for staff to follow, and for information to the public as to what we as council would prefer. And yet, what the presenters came forward before, Jodie and Paul, but we're basically saying the policy has to be much more descriptive and enforceable. Exactly where do we stand on this? Are we using this policy as just a broad brush approach towards the way council wants to address the filling policy, or are we trying to come up with some sort of legalistic framework?
Well, this is a difference between a statutory rule, which is the law, versus a policy or a guideline or an advisory note, which is somewhat discretionary. That's how they work in the planning sphere. So whether we call it a policy or a guideline is probably just a bit of a moot point, to be honest with you. It's like all of our planning policies that we have at the present time. the policy sets a base for what we are prepared to accept, and from time to time, depending on the particular circumstances of the case, we may vary that policy one way or another. So you can't write statutory requirements into a policy. You can only do the statutory requirements in a planning instrument or the Act itself. So I think you need to understand the difference between the law and the statutory requirements and the policies guidelines which are somewhat discretionary in any instance.
So would we be best off accepting any policy that we generally agree with and then look to amend it as we go along? Is that the idea for tonight's meeting, to pass what we have in place, but on the basis that we expect to be changing it within a few months, maybe for the new council coming in to review what we've done and try to build on that?
Well, through you, Madam Mayor, one of the things I just mentioned earlier was that if this policy is not adopted tonight, the draft policy is still there, and that could be used as a guideline in any discussions we have with any applicant who comes forward to give them some general guidance about how they put their application together. So it's certainly not necessarily all lost this evening. You will still have a base draft policy in place, but before you finalise it and adopt the policy to give it that higher status, the suggestion is that we go through a stakeholder forum and some further investigation of options, which is okay. It's certainly workable.
Oh, thank you.
All right, Jeff, I think you have your hand up next.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, I'm along the same lines as Councillor Reid. It seems to me that maybe the best thing to do is to adopt it and then and amend it. In other words, take the best of both. In part because there's going to be a change of council. There's going to be a delay because of that. It's going to take quite a while. And people are very strong about enforcement, and I suspect the draft policy can't be enforced as such. If we adopt it, then those bits that can be enforced will be enforced, and it will also show up those bits that do work well and don't work well, because in truth, for all that there's a lot of opinion about what's going to work and what's not, none of us actually know what is going to work. If we put it in place, then it can start working. But I would agree. Let's go straight into having that review, having all that information put together in one forum, and if we can come up with if you can come up with a better one in the next few months, I for one will cheer.
Thank you, Councillor Frost. Councillor Furry.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Look, I'm going to take a reverse approach to Councillor Frost and actually suggest that the recommendation, as myself and Councillor Jones have put forward, in my view, makes more sense. And there's a few reasons why. The first reason is when I joined this council in 2016 and was at the Wallaroo fire shed as a part of our roadshow on operational plans. I, in fact, had, I believe it was Ian Holcomb at the time, actually approached me and raised several suggestions, including, this is referring to heavy haulage, as a comparison policy, but basically stating that there was significant improvement required and this is what had happened in the past and the formula can be looked at and these things. It was only this year that we, in fact, made changes that Mr. Holcomb, for example, had suggested back in 2016. My commentary here, Madam Mayor, is leading to the approach of consulting with the community, investigating further options. And when I say the community, I mean those stakeholders who are very keenly interested and keenly involved in the process from end to end. And then building on a draft policy or building a policy in the first place is one of the, in my view, one of the effective ways in actually establishing that policy. My question, though, and of course I'm speaking for this recommendation, my question, though, relates to when we have a policy established, that then leads to the question of obtaining compliance to that policy, having metrics that measure the effectiveness of that policy, and of course actually defining what those metrics are. And we're finding that right now with the heavy haulage policy, for example. But the question I'm asking for this evening, through Madam Mayor to our planning director, is in the context of compliance, as I mentioned, enforcement and surveillance, could the planning director please provide an update pertaining to current and future resourcing, assets and activities that give council confidence that meaningful progress is being made in these areas? Thank you.
Through you.
Yep.
Thank you, Councillor Ferry, for your question. We're currently working on the compliance framework across all compliance activities for council. So, as councillors would be aware, provision was made in this year's operational plan for 2 compliance officers. The first one commences next Monday and has an extensive background in compliance activities. And once that person commences their employment, we will start the recruitment for the second compliance officer. So the initial focus in the compliance area will be on establishing the compliance framework. So the first part of that will be a review of the enforcement policy. We'll be going back to the New South Wales Ombudsman's guidelines and the model policy when we go to review our current policy. And again, we'll be taking a risk-based approach, which is the current basis of the existing policy. Internally, we have started some work around how we're going to manage our enforcement responsibilities. So we are keeping essentially a spreadsheet of compliance activities that we need to undertake. So any issues that are raised from the community are going into that particular list. And the new compliance officer, the environmental services team, along with the development control team, will be setting the priorities for the compliance action as we begin, in our compliance work. We're also, the highest priorities will be around the filling activities, in particular focusing on illegal land activity, like illegal land filling. And we will also be doing random audits. So those developments which have development consents will be going and visiting those sites unannounced and undertaking audits of what they're doing against the development consent. And we'll also be following up on other illegal development activities that we have going on that we're aware of at the moment that don't necessarily relate to fill. We're also working on the internal processes of how we handle compliance as the complaints are raised with council, and how they then get referred on to the compliance person and the technical and professional support that is needed from staff to assist the compliance officer in his role. We're also, at the moment, going through and looking, ensuring that the compliance officer will have the appropriate delegations and authorities that need to be in place. And we're about to commence just a very small project around reviewing our notices and orders, just to make sure that they are compliant with the legislation, just to make sure that we are doing the right thing when we do issue those notices and orders.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Director.
I'm just going to check with Michael because it's difficult for him, Michael McManus, to raise his hand. So just checking with you, Michael, if you had any questions or concerns.
Did Jeff Frost move an alternative motion?
No, he did not.
I will if you like, Michael. Probably should have.
Well, yeah, just if you raise the prospect of something different to Councillor Jones, and it would be nice to know if there's a foreshadowed motion if this one is defeated. Otherwise, it'll be won. So if that could be clarified, that would be handy.
Okay, if I can just get the 2 motions together, I would move that a draft filling policy be adopted, and that a stakeholder forum be held for further investigation of options and the policy review.
would it be appropriate to add and that the new council review it following 6 months of implementation?
Yeah, a time limit on it would be good. Yeah, that'd be a good idea.
Draft bill
Do
policy.
you mind putting? Can you
No.
include? Would that be appropriate, Mr. General Manager?
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor, yes, that certainly puts a time frame on it. That's not a problem.
Well, if Councillor Frost is prepared to move that, I'm prepared to second that when it comes to debate.
So that
If it comes to debate.
Yeah, that's a foreshadowed motion. Yeah.
it's a foreshadowed
Thank you.
if it
Thank
comes.
you.
Yep. Okay. All right.
In other words, Jeff and I backing it is probably going to lose.
Yeah, for sure.
If I may.
Thank you, Councillor. Just, Councillor Reid, if you could just hang on 1 second, I'm just going to check in the room here. I went to screen first because there were lots of hands up. Councillors in here, I'll leave Jasmine to close in a moment, but if there is anything else anybody else wishes to speak about here.
I do have a question.
All right, so I'll go back to Councillor Reid has a question.
Yes, through the General Manager to the resourcing breaches of it. What's your thinking on that before I make up my mind whether to vote here or not, or propose a different motion?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for your question, Councillor Reid. If Council proceeds with, well, firstly I'd say the policy is based around the legislative framework that exists in New South Wales for essentially earthworks, and the General Manager has spoken about the fact that it is the overarching rules for earthworks. They are in the LEP and they are in the State Environmental Planning Policy for exempt and complying development. So if there is no policy, we still have that legislative framework to fall back on, and the information that's in the policy, whilst it will no longer be a policy, we would use that as an internal guide in terms of directing applicants on the information that's required to be submitted and to assist us in drafting standard conditions for any development consent.
Through Madam Mayor, you've got to remember, go back to why we wanted a policy in the first place. The idea is that the legislation provides, yes, you can do filling, or no, you can't do filling. The idea of the policy was to try and address some of the issues that raised by the community in regards to the quantum of fill and the number of trucks coming into sites. So the policy is aimed largely at trying to put some limits around that as a baseline. There's always going to be circumstances where, we might vary it, but the idea was to give people who were trying to do the right thing by getting approvals what the baselines were that we were prepared to accept. That was the direction of the policy. So if you don't have that, if you don't have it as a policy, it can be used as a guideline as the Director of Planning has just indicated, because that's the first question. Can I do filling? And if so, what are the rules?
Councillor Turner and then Councillor Harker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Question to the Director. We have a very, very excellent heavy haulage policy in place. This fill policy, is it to complement? And if so, does it need to have the same strictures as the heavy haulage? And what loopholes in the heavy haulage allow fill? I presume that fill is imported in heavy trucks.
So in the first instance, the heavy haulage contributions plan, sorry, through you, Madam Mayor, it's a standalone document, and the contributions plan is actually provided for in the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. So it has its own structure, and the way it's implemented is dictated by the Act. So if you have the policy and the heavy haulage, the policy doesn't undermine the heavy haulage contributions plan in any way, because ultimately you can only levy the contributions through the plan on a development consent. So in terms of the loopholes, I go back to the local environmental plan. So essentially what the LEP says is that with development consent, you can undertake earthworks, and then it further defines earthworks and filling. But what it also says is, in certain circumstances where the works are ancillary, you don't need to get a further development consent. So you're relying, we have legal advice that assists us in determining what is ancillary, and we also we go back to case law and of course based on our own professional opinion around what is ancillary. The second part is that the definition of filling in the LEP states that landscaping is not filling. So I think that might be the other, and I'll use this inverted commas loophole that exists in the LEP clause, and that is to allow people to do reasonable landscaping without it actually needing a development application. Where the issue comes is where people say they're doing landscaping, but essentially they might be overdoing the landscaping to a point where it becomes like a waste. They're essentially disposing of a waste product, which is the fill, and that's how we characterise it in planning. So then when people claiming they're doing landscaping, it might appear that maybe then it's a little bit more than landscaping. Again, staff are having to draw on their knowledge and the legal advice that we have to determine, is it landscaping or is it actually, say, the disposal of waste, and then it becomes a waste disposal facility. Even if it does become waste and it is a waste disposal facility, if it is permissible in the zone, they can still lodge a development application. So even if they want to do a standalone filling activity, they still need to lodge the development application, and that's where the heavy haulage contribution plan potentially is picked up. But if you don't need development consent to do an activity or it is an exempt development, you can't apply the heavy haulage contributions plan.
Complicated. Councillor Harker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to clarify the options in the motion versus the foreshadowed motion, and just make sure my understanding is correct. In the current motion, it will be deferring the policy and then going to a stakeholder forum and doing further investigation. The other one, it puts a policy in place where we don't currently have one, but would the timing be eventually the same? So if we're not adopting this policy right now, doing the stakeholder engagement, and I think the general manager meant something about January, would the timing roughly be the same if we did implement the policy and then still follow the same process of stakeholder engagement, but with a policy in place that's then reviewed, or would there be any difference in that timeline?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I actually think the timeline, either the motion as it's before you and the foreshadowed motion, is going to be around about the same time period. You've got to remember that the election's in January, the polls are declared on Christmas Eve virtually. You've got to have so many days to get your executive in place, your mayor and deputy mayor. That's going to have to occur in early January. That will be the first formal council meeting, and then there's got to be a whole series of briefings to get the council, particularly the new councillors, up to speed with what their responsibilities are and give them good, solid background information so they can make decisions. So, while it might be possible to hold a stakeholder forum and do some investigation by January, you've got to take into account the fact that the new incoming council will not be up to speed with this issue. So you've really got to give them some time to workshop it potentially amongst themselves to get across the issues and then be in a position to make a good decision at the end of the day. So I actually think a time frame of about 6 months is more realistic. Yep. Thinking about what a new council's got to deal with when they get to office. Just remember when you first got elected, just how long it took you to get up to speed with some of the key challenges and issues. It's a steep learning curve, we know, but you've got to give them some time. Give them an unrealistic time frame, and you'll probably end up with a bad policy or a bad outcome. So I
suppose the part of my question there is, we all want to make this policy as robust and continue the consultation and make it as good as possible. It's whether for 6 months do we continue with no policy or do we continue with this policy, and what is the most beneficial way for the community to operate.
Just let me clarify for you a little bit. It's not that you don't have a policy, you have a draft policy right now. The adoption of a draft policy gives it a little bit more oomph and status than your draft. Your draft policy can still be taken into consideration while it's a draft. It's been on public exhibition, so it certainly can be used. The real challenge is if you end up in court, what status will the court put on your draft policy versus an adopted policy? And that, look, the Land and Environment Court is about 50-50 either way. So, look, to me, it probably doesn't really matter one way or the other, whether you continue with your draft policy while you hold your stakeholder forum or whether you adopt it and give a commitment to reviewing. The choice is yours.
Yep. And just a final question, which is the similar sort of process. My understanding of all of those questions is that there's probably a little more meat behind it if we adopt it with a commitment to a review and a round table within 6 months. And that's just my interpretation of what I'm hearing. I just need a clarification whether there's, in a Land and Environment Court, if that's where it gets to, because that's where these things end up when it becomes difficult, is there more oomph in an adopted policy, albeit being reviewed? Councillor Burgess.
I just think we should adopt this because we're just going round and round and round in circles and not getting anywhere. It's been just going on now for nearly half an hour.
Okay, Councillor Jones, would you like to close it out?
Yeah, thank you. Madam Mayor, we adopted a policy that no one was comfortable with. It was called the Undetected Water Leaks Policy. And within the same meeting, within half an hour of adopting it, guess what? We didn't want to apply it. We didn't like what the results would do. And so we decided, you know what? It's okay to get things wrong. Let's defer any decision and let's review the policy. That's what we did. And the result was, after probably 9 years of kicking this policy around and not liking it very much, we've got a fantastic policy. We've got a great result. We've got a really wonderful result as far as I was concerned. I think we got something that was so workable. It was sensitive to our community's needs. It was sensitive to our our farming community and our urban people. And I just think, what are we doing? We know that there's something not quite right. Every one of you feels it in your gut that this policy could be better. And we know that because we spent the money, we spent our staff's time, and we did the work with the heavy haulage policy. And we got something that's robust enough to take back to a community that's been hurting for a very long time. And they said, thank you, this is good enough. There's enough meat on this to do the job. That's what I want for our community with this policy, because they have been hurting for a very long time. And I certainly don't want to adopt anything or make changes to anything without hearing from all the stakeholders, because there will be repercussions. If we don't have the farmers' view on what the changes for this draft bill will mean for them, we need to know before we make that decision. We cannot just listen to one side of the argument and make a lot of changes. I want to see us do a robust round forum. We have a draft policy that will keep us rolling underneath during that time that we get our fellow councillors in the next edition of council up to speed. But what I don't want to see us do is adopt a policy that may have to sit there for more than the 6 months. As we heard from Councillor Ferry, our intention to review and our intention to get the heavy haulage policy right started a long time ago and has only just come to fruition. And that's something we've all had to come to terms with, no matter what policy it is or what we want to achieve on council. There's how you want to get it across the line in your first 6 months, and then there's the reality of 9 years just ticked past, but we're finally here now. So I urge you not to adopt this policy, to keep it as a draft. Let's get our job done properly. Let's go out and communicate. Let's consult. let's get some expert advice in if we need to rewrite this policy and commit funds to it if we see a need. But let's not adopt something that we know in our gut just doesn't feel quite right yet.
Okay, councillors, on that basis, the recommendation that we have, which is moved by Councillor Jones and Councillor Furry, being aware that there's a foreshadowed motion should this one not get through. So the current motion on the table is adoption of the policy be deferred pending council facilitating a stakeholder forum, further investigating the options and a policy review. So all those in favour? So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so those against? Which is 5. So motion lost. Thank you. So we'll move to the foreshadowed motion. So we're going to a foreshadowed motion is moved and seconded by Councillor Frost and Councillor McManus. I'm just making sure I'm giving our minute taker correct timing. So that now becomes the motion. I believe we have debated it fairly well, but I have to give you an opportunity one more time to debate. Councillor Furry.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Look, I'll keep it quite short. We were all elected in September 2016. This is our 48th council meeting for those who weren't aware. Went by very quickly. But what I would say is this, is that as one of 9 councillors in this room, I take it quite seriously when I'm asked to cast my vote and place my name against a policy. That is my stamp as one of 9 to say that I believe that this is a sound, fully comprehensive policy that we are putting forward. Tonight, whether it was the previous motion or this one, I feel that we have basically given an admission to the community that we've got work to do on this policy, and that's why I'll be voting against this motion.
Thank you. Does anybody else wish to speak for or against it? Okay, then in this case, I will put the motion as it stands, which says the draft filling policy be adopted and that a stakeholder forum be held for further investigation and council review in 6 months so that additions, problems, concerns, other things can be raised and modified should it be necessary. So that's moved and seconded by Councillor Frost and Councillor McManus. So all those in favour?
Aye.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which is Reid, Frost, McManus, Harker, Burgess and Abbey. Sorry, you're right there. And those against is Councillor Furry, Councillor Jones and Councillor Turner. Thank you very much. So motion carried. Thank you. If we could move to 6.2, Development Application Residential Subdivision 3 Burrard Place, Yass. We have recommendations in front of us. Do I have a recommendation or a mover or seconder for any of that? Have a question? We probably need to have, yes, okay, have a question first.
Madam Mayor, through you, just actually 2 questions. The first one is about the concerns raised by one of our earlier open forum presentations was regarding the traffic concerns that they had in terms of access. And I just wanted to double check that the director is satisfied that we're doing all we can to give as much access as possible and as many options as possible, so we're not directing traffic too much. And also, in regards to the open space, is that over and above what is required? Is it spot on? Or is more required in a potential future one? I really wanted to get my head around that because I understood the contribution to be less than what they're actually putting forward. So I wanted to have a deeper understanding of what have we just gained or accepted as part of this. Thank you.
Sure. So in relation to the access and traffic requirements, I'm satisfied that they meet council policy, and where they don't, there is draft conditions of consent. So the council report does identify that Grand Junction Road and Bureau Place are substandard, so the consent would require upgrading works to be done there. The subdivision does have a link back into Wellington Road, and then it has obviously another intersection into Grand Junction Road and Bureau Place. So they've been reviewed by Infrastructure and Assets, and I think they're satisfactory. Just in relation to the open space, so they're proposing to provide 1,600 square metres of open space, and they've redesigned it so essentially it occurs further into the subdivision, if you understand what I mean, and that it has potential to be added to if there is further subdivision of Lot E in DP 30504. I think that it's satisfactory. I think we're looking at a Category 2 playground for memory, and what is proposed to the council is that the open space be dealt with via a voluntary planning agreement, which obviously would need to come back to council. In terms of the contributions, the works that are proposed and the dedication of land is greater than that we would levy under this our section 712 contributions plan, and I'm hoping to address that through the voluntary planning agreement.
All right, so there is a recommendation here which also includes that voluntary planning agreement coming back to council with more detail and information in it, obviously. So to actually, we have to make a decision, so we have to. Thank you.
Move the
So Councillor Turner and Councillor McManus moved and seconded. Thank you. Does anyone have Councillor Reid? I can see you have a question up.
Yes, it's through the General Manager to the Director of Planning. It basically comes back to a question, a point that was raised by Mrs. Fleur Flannery. How much control do we as a council have over the development plans? I understand, of course, that we can, there are certain measurements, certain layouts of roads that the developer should adhere to. But I don't believe council has the authority or the right to start to determine the layout of the blocks of land on a particular plan. Is that correct or not?
Essentially, through you, Madam Mayor, thank you, Councillor Reid, the applicant can essentially make an application that complies with the planning controls, and we assess that. So some applicants will come to us beforehand and ask us to provide feedback on their development application before it is lodged, which we do quite regularly. Other development applications are just lodged with council, and discussions happen throughout the assessment of the application. I think that answers your question. Do you need me to provide additional information?
Through you, Madam Mayor, because council approves a subdivision, you do have the right to say whether you like the layout or not, or whether you could make some suggestions about how it might be. But as the Director of Planning has indicated, if a developer or subdivider has a pre-lodgement meeting, often we can give that information to them before they formally lodge the application. And where that occurs, more often than not, the application would be successful in terms of coming up with a suitable subdivision design. The ones that don't engage are the ones that probably run into more problems than not. So you do have the final say on the design, but again, we offer suggestions rather than be heavy-handed and dictate the layout to them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions, councillors?
Yes, if you don't mind, Madam Mayor, just there was quite a bit of mention about sort of, master planning and, that there is potential for another or adjoining development. And I just want to clarify our understanding, that at this stage, there is, to the best of our knowledge, the applicant actually mentioned that they don't own the land. They may have future interest in the land, but right now there's nothing to plan because they don't actually own it.
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, that's correct, Councillor Harker. I think the proponent did mention that at the planning forum recently.
And I think there was a lot of very good information in the planning forum from both the concerned locals as well as the development. It was very informative on both sides, I think, and helpful. Any other questions, councillors? Anyone else wish to speak for or against it? Councillor Councillor Turner. Are you be closing? No, I'll let Councillor Jones and then Councillor Turner can close it up.
Just briefly, I just wanted to congratulate staff on the robust level of engagement with both developers and the submitters of the petition. As a councillor looking at both sides of this exchange, I think everyone's had a good opportunity to have their say. I think this particular development with the inclusion of this open space will be a great asset to our community, and it includes another park, which of course, once we accept that will be our responsibility to maintain. But a Category 2 park in that area I think is needed, even if it wasn't identified earlier on in the playground strategy. I think this development meets our objectives under the Yass Valley Council settlement strategy. We have a goal of where we want our population to be to sustain our community, whether that be our shops down on the main street or our schools or our health system. We need a level of population to sustain what we're going to do. And we have so few green spaces left. This has been on the cards now for over 34 years. That's 3 decades of the community knowing that this was going to be residential land. And while I would always love to have a crystal ball and say, we're going to master plan the whole lot, we can't put that on a developer who doesn't actually own the land. All we can do is work within the planning tools that we have to suggest, where our residential area would be. We've got a fantastic planning instrument to guide us in terms of our settlement strategy. This ticks the box in every aspect.
Thank you. Councillor Turner, if you'd like to close it out, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Largely what I was going to say has been stolen by Councillor Jones, however.
Damn it.
I've had a general rule of thumb in all of my time in council is not to go against a recommendation of the senior staff who have put an enormous amount of work into this, unless there were very strong overriding reasons for so doing. I can't find any strong overriding reasons for so doing. The reality is every time there's a development application in the Yass Valley Council area, there will be those who will be unhappy. The role of this council is to ensure the best value for the people and the community of the Yass Valley. And this, I believe, is a development that will enhance the Yass Valley and will allow us, as Councillor Jones has pointed out, to meet some of the population increase that we anticipate will happen, and there will be further development in that area. I commend the motion.
Thank you. All right, councillors, that being said, I shall put the motion that is before you. All those in favour?
Aye.
That's everyone. Thank you. Moving along to 6.3, development application, dwelling house and shed, 30 Monton Street, Bowning. They've requested a slight variation to be able to access the entrance office of a corner block.
I'll move the recommendation, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Frost. Seconded, Councillor Burgess. Does anyone else wish to speak for or against it? In that case, I'll put the motion as it stands. All those in favour?
Aye.
That's everyone?
Aye.
Yep.
Thank you. Moving to 6.4, re-establishment of alcohol-free zones.
So moved.
So moved, councillor Ferry. Seconded, councillor Jones. Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak for or against the motion? Councillor Jones.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I just wanted to raise the question that I put at our Monday meeting again. In terms of how other parts of our streetscape interact with this, what advice can the director give us on how to address issues such as like the laneway next to Memorial Hall, and how do we bring that into a control similar to this?
Through you, Madam Mayor, thank you, Councillor Jones, for your question. The alcohol-free zone only applies to the road and public car parks. So what I would propose is that we prepare I can provide you with some information around the other provisions in the Local Government Act that could be applied down laneways that are not necessarily public road. There is provision in the Act for alcohol prohibition areas, and also council has the option to develop orders essentially preventing certain activities from occurring, so I can provide that information to you.
Any other, Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm on a similar line, really. I'm trying to work out how that it seems to me that council should have an overriding policy that would include the parks in particular, the parks and other areas like the lane that Councillor Jones talked about, as well as just the roadsides. And I'm just wondering if there's some way we can bring all those together. I think it's important to have a policy like this. I know that one of the, I guess, unexpected or maybe expected benefits of being locked down, and there are not many, is that the amount of incidents associated with alcohol misuse is very much lowered, and reducing and having sensible alcohol-free zones in place makes sense. But they don't make sense if somebody somebody on the footpath moves into the park and is all of a sudden not, and the issue goes away because their jurisdiction is out. So I'm trying to work out how we might. I'm quite happy to go with this, but I would hope that the new council may be able to coordinate what's happening in those parks in particular, because it basically encompasses all the major gas parks in the CBD. So I'd like that to happen.
I'd like the Director of Planning, I think, has got a response to some of your questions.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Frost. Probably the best way to tackle is that I bring back a further report around the other forms of tools under the Local Government Act that you can use in terms of drinking in public spaces. I would like to take some advice from the New South Wales Police in doing that, because they'll be the ones that'll have the statistics, and they're the ones that will primarily enforce any areas where we prevent alcohol consumption. So I think the best way is we do some work with the New South Wales Police and we come back to council.
Okay, sounds good.
I don't think that needs to be in the motion. I think we'll just take that as you will bring
Madam,
a further report. Sorry, Councillor Fergus.
Oops, sorry, mute button. Just to be clear, if we were to put that type of information in this proposed Yass alcohol-free zone, I would actually withdraw as the mover, because my view on this is that we need to make evidence-based approaches. I understand that this council is a very politically diverse council. I think the last councillor who actually is about to argue a similar position was a Green, which is very strange bedfellow for me. But, Madam Mayor, alcohol does not necessarily associate 100% of the time with antisocial activity. Yes, it is a contributor, but it is not a one-for-one correlation. An opportunity for a family, friends who might be catching up, to have a picnic in the park, and they happen to bring out some champagne or some sparkling wine, should not feel like they are suddenly criminals. I don't think that's okay. I take Councillor Frost's point about someone moving from the footpath to the park. But at the same time, I believe that our police would act with discretion. If that individual is in fact verging into the park, the question would become whether or not they were being antisocial in the first place. So I just wanted to, as the mover, make that distinction that there is not a one-for-one correlation, and I'd fully support the director's comments that we need the statistics to do the talking here. Thank you.
Okay, so I don't think we're looking at amending the motion as it stands. It was just that further information be brought back to council at a later date when the director has had a chance to glean that information from the appropriate sources.
Understood. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Indeed, he did. Let's move it. My apologies.
Point of order, Madam Mayor. I didn't close the debate. I didn't actually use my right as the mover in the first place to speak to the motion. Thank you.
Do I make an assumption that that was a closing of debate?
Yep.
Thank you. All right. On that basis, there is a motion in front of you. All those in favour?
Aye.
That's everyone. Thank you. All right. If we could move to the Director of Infrastructure and Assets reports, and again, there's only 3 reports. Sometimes we have 10 or 15. So I'm happy to just go one at a time because it's only 3 reports. So Riverbank Park Adventure Playground concept plans. The recommendation is that it go on public exhibition for preferred options and reported back to council. So this is an exercise in just starting that process to ensure that we get community feedback into the overall Riverbank Park Adventure Playground. So moved, Councillor Turner, seconded Councillor Burgess. Councillor Jones, you wish to speak?
I think she was moving it.
Oh, sorry. It was a bit hard to know, the 3 hands went up, so you can all take turns.
Love looking at that one, thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. I do have a question for the director. Can we clarify in our communication of how we put these on exhibition, the type of fencing and the perimeter that it might include? The reason being is that if you look at the things that are included, barbecue facilities, internal access roads, fencing, to some mums and dads and grandparents out there, they may read that as fulfilling their every desire, that the play equipment will be completely enclosed. And if it's not, we need to be absolutely clear what we're actually communicating, because it has been something that's been raised with me. Will it be fully fenced? And I just want people to know what their options are, and so they're going in with eyes open. The second comment that I might make is, how can we put this on public exhibition to make it very clear what the concepts are? I visit playgrounds regularly, and I'm still struggling looking at these 2 concept plans to get a real feel for what is actually going to be in them. Are there any 3D modelling that can be provided by the consultants or the designers of these? I've been to all kinds of playgrounds, from the Acorn Park in Canberra to the what I call the Sandpit Park in Burra, and looking at these, I can't visualise very well. And if the greatest feature of one of these is a giant hill you can run up and then come down an amazing slide, I want people to be able to visualise it. I want people to see it, so that they know what options are in which.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. So the type of fencing, currently there's no fencing included. There was one option that I discounted that was provided that was closer to the water. The reason I discounted it because it was too close to the water, so everything's been moved back. So that
It's in your document.
don't have to have those fencing. But the option for fencing needs to be there. If people think that they need fencing, then we'll consider that as part of the future design. The plan so far for public exhibition of this revolved around signs down at the large scale versions of those plans with pictures of what was going to be included in there. I will track down if we can get the 3D fly-through models. I haven't asked that question at this point. I'm sure they may be available, they may not be. We will do a full public consultation plan. I think we've got that plan for actually Thursday, which we'll talk through these issues as to how we present this better. But I will take your advice on a 3D fly-through option, and we'll talk to the designers and see if they have that available. But we will use pictures, internet, posters down at the or placards down at the Riverbank Parkland in order to get this out as much as possible. Planning on talking to schools as well. So we have a fairly comprehensive program planned. We just have to go through and get the final bits once we've got approval to go to the public forum.
I guess my final question would be, if we come back and it's a very close call on both designs, are there elements of both interchangeable? So are there features that we can actually pull out? Like, are you asking people, do they like that design, or are you asking them what they like about both designs?
So the questions we are looking at is, which design do you prefer? Why do you prefer it? Why don't you like the other design? But also, what elements of design A do you think would make design B better, or what elements of design B do you think would make design A better? That will then obviously have to balance that against the budget and the space available to safely put all those together, and then come back with potentially only one option, but it may come back to a couple of close calls that we will come back and recommend to council as to which way we wish to go.
Great. All right. Are there any other questions, councillors? If not, I'll move the motion as it stands. So all those in favour? That's everyone.
Aye.
Thank you. Moving to 7.2, the Tesla electric charging station. Do I have a mover and second? Councillor Turner, Councillor Jones, thank you, moving that recommendation. Does anyone wish to speak for or against that motion?
Oh, hang on, you got the right one?
The one that was moved.
Yeah, there's two there.
In the papers. The second one was a one that was discussed, I think, as a potential.
I'll move the second one first.
We want the one with the universal?
Yes.
Yeah, we got the one with the universal.
You don't demand them to do that.
No, we,
So I've spoken to Tesla.
All right, sorry, I'll bring this back into the proper conversation. I was a little bit confused, so thank you for that. I believe the recommendation that was being moved and seconded was a slightly slight addition to the one that was in the papers in front of you. So the inclusion of the Telstra superchargers be fitted with universal connections is the recommendation that is moved and seconded by Councillor Turner and Councillor Jones, not the one that was in your papers. So there was a slight amendment to it. So just for clarity, the director is actually just going to comment on that question I just raised, which was, can we ask them to do the universal connections, because we were unsure about that. So I hand that back to you,
So I
Director.
confirmed with Tesla yesterday, they will fit CCS Type 2 chargers.
So those universal
which are the
chargers.
universal chargers at this point in time.
Okay, thank you. I have Councillor Furry had a question or not?
No, look, if Tesla said that, Madam Mayor, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure that they were happy, considering it's their infrastructure. Cheers.
That was my question as well, so thank you. Councillor Harker.
Sorry if I'm asking you to repeat that. It just dropped out a little bit. Are you saying that you, Director, had a conversation with Tesla and this is an option? I suppose they're comfortable with this option?
So in Australia, Tesla fit CCS Type 2 chargers to their supercharger stations.
Okay.
Which are the universal?
So the universal chargers,
Yep.
universal ones.
Okay, thank you. And I think, just speaking for the motion, I think while I have to thank the Director for going and investigating all the different possibilities of sites that didn't have a significant impact on our community but provided a benefit in offering the stations. But I think this particular site is really great because it offers expansion if that is an option for the future, if that's something the company wants to do.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Frost, you have your hand up as well. You need to get off mute, Councillor. Councillor Frost, there we go.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I want to speak against this motion. I consistent with, I didn't see any point in why we should be providing NRMA with huge amounts of our land. Not that we provide a huge amount. This time we're providing 6 car parks. And we're giving them to a multinational company worth about $52 billion. They had a profit last year of something like 730 million, but their value went up by nearly 18 billion. They're a speculative company, if you like. Their value goes up basically based on their whims of the share market. They are not short of a quid. They've got billions of dollars in ready cash in order that they could actually provide a proper charging station, whether that looks like a service station or takes over or becomes part of the station. They could do all of that. They don't need Yass Valley Council's money or Yass Valley's support in order to establish an industry in which they see themselves as a leader and which they seem to want to make lots and lots of money out of. And I really don't get it. I look at this briefing and I look at the briefing for a later event where we're talking about whether or not we provide rate relief to churches and clubs and those sort of things. And the comment, the briefing says, well, we should, these people should be organising to provide their own funds. Well, I think if that's the test that should be applied to the Vine Church, which provides lots of free food and all sorts of things in town, or the tennis club or the golf club, which provides heaps of green space for us all that we all enjoy. If that's the test for them, then it should be the test for Tesla. So I can't see any way that I can support taking 6 car parks away from the general public, because that's what it will be, and giving them to a huge multinational in order for them to increase their profit.
Thank you, Councillor. Have Councillor Harker, then Councillor Reid.
Sorry, my hand needs to go down.
It's an old hand, thank you. Councillor Reid.
Yes, the General Manager to the Director of Infrastructure. Are we actually giving them 6 car parks, or will these 6 car parks still be available to the general public? I.e., are we going to fence them off, control them, or what?
Through you, Madam Mayor. So the car parks won't be fenced off. They will be allocated for electric vehicles as opposed to being fenced off. To our parking will remain, but they'll only be for electric vehicles.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Frost, is yours an old hand or it's you back up again? And you're on mute. Okay, I'll take it as an old hand.
It's an aging hand, Madam Mayor.
Yeah, sorry, not an old hand. I take that back. Apologies. Councillor Jones, you also had your non-aging hand up as well.
No, it's aging. So I want to make a comment in favour of the motion, but I also have a follow-on question. Does that mean that our compliance people will find someone who accidentally parks in it if it was, like, theoretically speaking, the entire car park was full and they parked in it? Would we send somebody around, or we haven't even crossed that bridge yet, have we?
Can I make a suggestion that at this point we have bigger issues than someone parking?
That's right.
And there's issues for Yass Valley.
And decommissioning, if we built that into our agreement with them, should they decide not to, the decommissioning of
Yes.
Okay, great, okay. I'm sure that we would have, but I just wanted to make sure. Just in response to Councillor Frost's comments, and actually may I thank him for his contribution, because previous to this he has been pushing for the universal charges, which is a great addition, and it's made us go back and ask for that, which I think is a good thing. But we were never doing this to give a leg up to a multi-billion-dollar company. We're doing this because it makes economic sense to Yass Valley. Why does it make economic sense? Because it brings people into our town, and if we have a situation where someone drove a bus from Canberra in no COVID environment and everything was hunky-dory, and brought people in a bus, and they wanted to park for 2 hours in our car park and send everyone to the coffee shops and buy some things while they were there, a couple of bottles of wine from the visitor information centre, some local jam at the markets perhaps. Wouldn't we think that's a great thing? We go, knock yourself out, come and park for 2 hours and bring your busload of people. Well, that's what we're looking at. It's just that they're doing it in a very sufficient way in terms of, one vehicle at a time, and it's a new and emerging industry. And I'm happy to renegotiate in 5 years at a much more economical way for us. And I look forward to that moment in time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Would you like to close it up? Well, Councillor Jones sort of did, but I'm going to let you talk anyway.
Well, it was actually my motion in the first place.
Right, okay, sorry. We're stealing motions. Councillor Turner.
You would think that I would have learnt my lesson at this stage and not move a motion which is seconded by Councillor Jones, who is immediately going to steal my thunder and take everything that I was going to say out of my lips before I say it. However, I'm going to still say it. This is not about profits for Tesla, NRMA, or anything else. We have a prayer at the start of all of our motions which says that we did the true welfare of Australia and the people of the Yass Valley. If we are led to believe all of the hype on electric vehicles, it will benefit the environment. It won't for a while because the only power that's going down the tube is coal power at this point in time. However, be that as it may, it is going to benefit Australia in the future. There will be more electric vehicles in the Yass Valley, and therefore these will be used by residents of the Yass Valley, but more importantly, it will be used by those people who drive into the Yass Valley with their pockets full of money. People with no money don't buy Tesla vehicles. People with money buy Tesla vehicles, and they have disposable income which this valley can well do with. This is an investment in the future of the Yass Valley to get external money, get them off the highway, not have them at the bypass, not have them at the service stations. We have them in the middle of town, and we have them at our mercy, and the economy of this valley will depend upon it. I commend the motion.
Thank you. All right, councillors, close the debate. So all those in favour? All those against?
Aye.
Councillor Frost is against, the rest are for. Okay, thank you. Motion carried. Yass Water Treatment Plant Upgrade Project. We have a report, an updated report for noting, but I think we also wanted to add, I think there was a suggestion that another portion be added, that the decision made at the July 21 meeting to proceed with the design and business case for stage 2 and 3 based on the outcomes of the peer review be reaffirmed. So that means that we are continuing on with stages 2 and 3 as we had agreed to ensure that we actually have a proper treatment plant. Stage 1 is great, it's a beginning, but stages 2 and 3 will give us the result and the community the result that they were asking for and have been begging for us to get resolved for some time. That's my intro. Anyone like to move and second it?
First off the camera.
Jeff, are you moving that, Jeff?
Yeah, quite happy to, Madam Mayor, yeah.
Seconded, Councillor Reid, thank you. Okay, the hands are getting a bit confusing, but that's okay.
That's right. There you go.
Councillor Frost, did you wish to speak to that?
Madam Mayor, only to commend staff and yourself on the work that you've been doing on this, and just to remind people that the reason we're reaffirming it is because we're having difficulty getting this through state government, and it would seem to be the state bureaucracy more so than the state politicians. However, one is in charge of the other there, and eventually it shouldn't be that we, having been promised that whatever it takes was the promise that was made, it shouldn't be that we have to be fighting and go through this amount of stuff, particularly when we've got an independent arbiter who's come and had a look at the design, has confirmed that it's an excellent design, and given us some improvements to it, which is great. But then to have people in the state government then question and say, oh no, hold off and see how the few little bits of stage one, how they pan out. It's an excuse, and very transparently an excuse to try and defer so that it doesn't happen. And I'm really disappointed with the state government that's allowed that to happen, and I hope they change their mind very quickly. But I think it's important that this council stands right behind its staff and its mayor in reaffirming our present course. Yeah.
Yes, our decision is still the decision of our council to go ahead with this, come what may.
Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any other questions to this? If not, I'll actually put it to the motion as it stands. All those in favour? Thank
Aye.
you. I think that's everyone. Yes, thank you. Moving to the Director of Corporate and Community. I'll just do a quick run through if there's comments of people. 8.1, Investment and Borrowings Report. 8.2, Environmental Upgrade Finance Trial.
Yeah.
Councillor Frost. Rates and Charges Donation Policy, there's a bit of a variation to that one. So, Fraud Corruption Policy Review. No.
Yep.
Flying of Flags Policy Review. No, okay. So can I have a mover and second to 8.1 and 8.5? Councillor Turner, thank you. And Councillor Reid, I can see at the bottom there somewhere.
Yep.
All those in favour? That's everyone, thank you. So we'll move back to 8.2 Environmental Upgrade Finance Trial. We've got a motion there. Jeff, you wanted to speak to that, but did you want to move the motion and speak to it?
No, I don't particularly want to move the motion, but can I ask a question first? Could I just ask the director, please, if we've done any figures about how much it's actually going to cost council to do this and how much income comes back in from it for council in terms of council's budget?
Through the Mayor, this won't cost council anything. At this point in time, the only involvement council has is to actually bill the trial participants through the rates. And looking at some of the other councils that are doing it, it's not a huge amount of take up.
So it's not a big cost to council, or almost zero cost to council, and not a huge take up, but worth the trial, you believe? Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Do I have a mover and seconder for this motion? Councillor Reid, thank you. Councillor Jones. Okay. Anybody else wish to speak for or against it or have questions?
Yes, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Frost.
Madam Mayor, I spent a long time in my career involved in it was a rural reconstruction, basically, and saw some of the difficulties that people got into when they were basically down on their uppers and they had a lot of debt. I look at this program and I cannot see any logical reason for it other than for people to be selling equipment to people that cannot obtain ordinary finance. And given the current interest rates are so low and so on, I really think that if people can't get current finance, it's because the bank assessment has been that they are not they're not worthy of it. If we cut across if this program allows those people to essentially takes the bank out of the equation because they have the lien over the land, it'll allow people to get themselves into even further debt than and more liens against their property. As I say, having seen the back end of this in the rural sector, I am very loath to support anything to do with a scheme that would move people away from the normal risk management that they should do given present system. So I will vote against it. I don't see any market failure there that is being addressed by this. It just does. I can't see why it would be done, other than it's a feel-good thing for a government looking to show its green credentials, perhaps. But in terms of what it may do to individuals involved, I'm very concerned.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ferry, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to echo Councillor Frost's comments. Certainly, councillors who were able to attend, although a lot of other things were happening on that day, the particular presentation on EUAs as a concept, I certainly felt that it was effectively sold to councillors as a bit of a sales pitch, as a bit of a gimmick. I didn't actually feel very confident leaving that session, and particularly the projects that were mentioned, etc. Certainly, there's just something from a personal perspective that didn't feel right. I have significant concerns. Council, I guess, aligning or associating them with this concept. So I'll be voting against it as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other councillors wish to speak for or against the recommendation? Okay, on that basis, unless Councillor Reid wish to close out.
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, all right. I will put the recommendation as it stands. All those in favour?
Aye.
All those against? Just Councillor Frost and Councillor Ferry. Thank you. Motion carried. So we will move to rates and charges donations policy. There was a slight variation to the recommendation. I think that was circulated briefly. Do I have a mover and seconder for that?
Happy to move it, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Frost and Councillor...
Madam Mayor, point of clarification, which one is which? So Councillor Frost is moving which of the two on screen?
The second one, the one that says that you do it for the year and be done with it and people know what they're doing.
So a point of clarification, sorry, Madam Mayor, this is very difficult for me to interpret.
Yep.
The second one, are those varied percentages? So when it says current donation arrangements, effectively we're saying as they are, whereas the first one is referring to 50% of the current donation arrangements, as opposed to 50% of what they're liable for in accordance with rates and charges.
So the 50%, as I understand it, has been removed. And so this is just current donation arrangements with organisations stay as they are for 2021-22 because we're mid-year and it would be very difficult for an incoming group of councillors to try and sort this out at end of December, beginning of January. So they have stays for the full 12 months. And that before the budget next year, the new councillors will have a chance to review the donations policy and amounts as a new council, as they should.
Thank you. Happy to second that, Madam Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Ferry, thank you. Councillor Burgess.
The council, all these places like Gutterell Walnut, we haven't paid rates and that before. How come we've got $1,200 rates this year? And I see the same things happening to the tennis club. Yes.
Well, through you, Madam Mayor, they've always been rated. It's just that we've made donations on their behalf to pay the rates, to cover the rates. So they don't actually...
What's going to happen now then?
So what will happen now if this motion gets up is that the current arrangement they're enjoying at the moment will be extended for another 12 months. But the new council will consider whether they are going to continue with that program into the future.
I understand.
Yeah. So they get, like we did, go through all of the policy and the recipients and decide whether they're comfortable with the calculations and the percentage and that donation as part of the work council.
All been chasing me about it.
Yeah. Okay, so does anyone else wish to speak for or against it? Okay, I think it's just a sensible decision for the incoming councillors, I would have to say. Gives them a few months to get themselves sorted. All those in favour? Thank you. That's everyone.
It is.
Fraud and corruption control policy review. The draft, the policy be adopted is the recommendation. Do I have a mover and seconder for that?
Happy to move.
Thank you, Councillor McManus.
Yeah, could I move it? Sorry, Madam Mayor, could I just, quick question?
Hang on one second.
Again, could I ask what is moving, because
Councillor Frost, can I just get you to hold for a second? I've got a mover, which is Councillor McManus, and a seconder, Councillor Reid. And now you have a question. Thank you. I just needed the paperwork right.
Well, I was just making sure that the motion that's being moved is the one that includes those extra few words which I circulated this morning.
That is not the one that has been moved, no.
I'll be removing the recommendation of staff without your words, Councillor Frost.
Okay, right. Well, I will foreshadow a motion with my words, if I may.
You can foreshadow that, thank you.
Yeah.
Does anyone wish to speak for the draft fraud and policy control, that it just be adopted as it is?
Well, if I might speak, Madam Mayor.
Yes, you can speak against it.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, the policy is a good one, but it lacks one part, which I think we saw a really good example of. We saw a really good example of at the beginning of this meeting with Councillor Jones. Unfortunately, if by doing the policy as it's as written, is very one-sided in showing it is very much anti-fraud and corruption, and so it should be, but it has no balancing at all. And so there's nothing there in terms of degree that can be balanced against what happens in terms of a fraud and corruption control measure. And one of the things that councillors and senior staff do quite a lot with within the gambit of this policy is that they look whether or not to remove themselves from meetings. And this policy, as it was drafted and put there, has no balancing that says, as Councillor Jones found, she had a very minor or a trivial conflict of interest. And this policy would imply that she should maybe remove herself from the meeting. The consequence of that is twofold. One is that it would remove a very good councillor from a decision in which she should be involved. The second is, if she does not remove it, even though it's trivial, she leaves herself exposed to criticism, particularly from outside this council, that they haven't been, that they're not complying with the fraud and corruption and control policy. So what my few words there that I want to put in do is actually remedy that. But the policy as it is now does not allow us to, does not provide councillors or senior staff with the defence that they need to be there in order to have effective representation, so that they can represent their constituents as well as they possibly could. It will unbalance the balance that we currently have, where councillors are able to balance the need for to fight fraud and corruption and the perception of it, and the need to represent as effectively as they possibly can their constituents. So I'll vote against the first one and commend the foreshadowed motion.
I might just get Lynette to actually respond to a couple of those comments, if you're happy with that, Councillor.
Yeah.
I need to say that I think the wording that you're trying to put in there is inappropriate. The policy has been written with the statutory instruments taken into consideration for the code of conduct, especially where there's intent. So basically, you can't put aside the fraud and corruption because you're dealing with the community. The fraud and corruption is a part of the councillor's every moment decision, and code of conduct is there to determine otherwise. You can decide whether you have a disclosure of interest or not, whether it is community-based or not, and that is taken into consideration. So I think that what you're trying to say is that if it's a community decision, then you can put the fraud and corruption policy aside. Well, you can't do that, I'm afraid.
So,
if I might respond, I'm not saying that you put it aside at all. I'm simply saying that there is a balance that we all have to make when we deal with these things, and if the policy document doesn't allow for that balance, then we have a less than ideal policy, and it should allow for that balance.
Through the Madam Mayor, the policies stand side by side. You've got to have regard to both policies when you're making any decisions. So you need to, we cannot act fraudulently or corruptly. That's a no-no even under our code of conduct. So the code of conduct would basically then say you've got to then, as an elected representative or as a senior staff member making a decision, you've got to make a decision about whether you have a pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest and declare it appropriately. So it's not as though one overrides the other. They work in parallel, and while we comply with the fraud and corruption control policy, at the same time we're still obliged to comply with the code of conduct that determines whether we have an interest or not.
Okay. So I think Councillor Ferry has his hand up as well.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, I just wanted to echo the commentary from the staff. We have to remember that this is a policy for our organisation. We are not above the organisation. We are representatives and custodians from the community, ensuring that that representation is made. It's not a right for us to be the representatives. It's a privilege that we are representatives. If we put the content that is proposed into the preamble or the introduction to this policy, we actually risk the inverse, which is effectively we create the ability for the policy to be interpreted in a way that was never intended. And that would be deeply concerning. We have to remember that this is not a policy specifically for councillors, specifically for executive. It is a policy for the organisation. For those of us in the room who've probably dealt with this a lot longer than I've even been alive, it's something that cannot have interpretation. It must be black and white. And it's as simple as that. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak for or against it before I put the motion? Councillor Jones.
I find myself in a very awkward position. Councillor Frost, I appreciate that that my confidence in deciding that I was going to stay in the room after I'd consulted my code of conduct and my consideration of my remoteness in terms of a pecuniary interest. To then have that enter a debate on fraud and corruption was unexpected. And I just want
I found it unexpected too.
I appreciate that you're commending my ability to make that decision. Here's where I think that Councillor Frost may have the wrong end of the stick. We as councillors have to consider our code of conduct as part of that, declaring interests, as do our staff. And in that glove goes the hand of the policy of the fraud and corruption control policy. And so I just want to make it clear that I do understand the intent behind the foreshadowed motion, but I need to talk to the current motion, which is it does the job. It is black and white. There's fraud and corruption or there's not. And where we have to make sure that we're walking the fine line and making sure that we represent our community and have considered all of our options is at the very beginning with our code of conduct in terms of declaring interest. And I just wanted to just say a few words there, just because if lo and behold, if someone had just entered the live stream, then they may be wondering what on earth I have done earlier in this meeting. So I just wanted to ensure you that in the experience of 9 years, we still have to test the water, whether it be with our fellow colleagues or around this table, to ensure, you know, do I have a conflict? How will this be perceived? And would it lead eventually to a perception of fraud and corruption if I was to vote in that? But at the very beginning, we are not dealing with a fraud and corruption policy, we're dealing with a code of conduct. So I think that's where we just need to draw the line on the intent on what Councillor Frost is hoping to achieve there. And should it be the code of conduct that we were reviewing and bringing back, I would applaud that segue into that particular policy and look forward to its addition.
All right, councillors, unless anybody else wishes.
Madam Mayor, just in closing, when it comes to fraud and corruption, black and white is a far safer place for all councillors to be. It's the murky grey that the Darryl Maguires and the Eddie Obeeds live in. For us, if the rules are black and white, it makes it very easy. Later on tonight, you'll be electing a representative of the community to go on to a community consultation panel for Transgrid. I'm even abstaining from voting or participating in that vote because I work for Transgrid. My wages don't go up or down, there's no pecuniary interest, but the public would see me participating in that as a little bit murky. It's far easier for all of us to stay in the black and white, and it makes our life as councillors better. Because we don't have that mud thrown at us, we don't get dragged down the main street, people gossiping about whether we did the right thing or the wrong thing. This policy is black and white, makes our life very easy.
Thank you, councillor. All right, I shall put the motion as it stands. All those in favour? All those against?
A very big aye.
Councillor Frost is against, everyone else is for, motion carried. Thank you. Going to the General Manager's report, and I'm noting that 2 councillors need to leave for 9.3, so can I might just run through 9.1, 9.2 need to go to confidential because it discusses individuals. If I can have a mover, is Councillor Turner. Councillor Reid seconding, thank you. That's the first hand I saw up. All those in favour? Thank you. And I'll just ask, give Councillor Turner time, and Councillor McManus, if you want to, just before you go, Councillor Turner, sorry. We'll try dealing with 9.4 and then come back to 9.3 with your concurrence, councillors. It allows the last item in the General Manager's report to be dealt with.
It's just a tabling of the petition in association with that subdivision you've already made a decision on tonight, but it's council's protocol said that it has to be tabled.
It has to be tabled and acknowledged, so if I so moved, Councillor Furry, seconded, Councillor Turner, thank you. All those in favour?
Aye. Aye.
That's everyone. So we'll go to 9.3 and I'll allow Councillor McManus and Councillor Turner to vacate for this decision discussion.
Madam Mayor, just
Ali,
confirm.
can you just text me when it's back when I come back in, please?
Question, Madam
Yes,
Mayor, are we
we
not
can.
able just to move Councillor McManus into the lobby?
Yeah.
Yes, just putting him.
Oh, too late, he's left. It's fine.
No, he's in the waiting room.
That's all right. I don't mind messaging if that's a suitable
He's in the
solution.
waiting room, so we can bring him back in as soon as we've made the decision here. So in front of you is the HumeLink Community Consultative Committee, and they've requested that we either have a councillor or an alternate, is the recommendation, Director of Planning and Environment be the alternate delegate. Is there a councillor who would like to sit on this consultative committee? bearing in mind that several councillors are not considering running again, that you would need to get a new one by January.
Madam Mayor, can I move that we actually go with the other way around as a recommendation? And I'm happy to speak to that if there is a seconder.
So that your recommendation with the Director of Planning Environment be the delegate
Yes.
and alternate can be a councillor
Yes.
at such time. So just reversing the order. Is that that's your recommendation?
That's correct.
Councillor Jones.
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor, I really want this to be a councillor eventually, so I just want to make sure that we've got a timeline to bring them on board once the new council is.
Madam Mayor, I'd be happy to add a condition in there that this be reviewed at the commencement of the next term of council.
Can I suggest we give them a month or so because they're going to get inundated with a lot of information.
Okay. What would that put us on? March 2022.
Through you, Madam Mayor, after every election, council has to reconsider the nominations to all of its committees and all of the internal, external arrangements. So that would be a matter of course. So while the director's nominated as the nominee at this point in time, after the election, all nominations finish and we start again.
So we don't necessarily need that representation with the new councillor?
Madam Mayor, happy to speak to it once there's a seconder.
Yep. I need so we've just got that the Director of Planning Environment nominated for the Humelink Community Consultative Committee, with a councillor being the alternate delegate.
Yep.
We reviewed, obviously, you don't have to have those words, will be reviewed with the new council, with the overall committee structure. So I've got a seconder in Councillor Reid. Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Reid, for seconding. So, Madam Mayor, this is pretty straightforward, I hope. We're about to go into an election. We have a council that's about to go into caretaker mode. We need to provide some form of continuity in the meantime to this consultative committee. The one standing, stable, ongoing function, besides elected representatives for a set time period, is our executive. Our time period is running out as councillors. I don't think that would be very appropriate for the consultative committee to send a councillor very temporarily and then have a whole new range of councillors. I feel as if this provides a greater sense of continuity, and it has someone with most likely, it's the Director of Planning and Environment. So with subject matter expert knowledge going to this consultative committee who can provide sound advice and report back to council in the meantime. So I'm hoping this is pretty straightforward. Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Frost, you had a question?
Yeah, Madam Mayor. Look, I'd just like, I'm uncomfortable with changing it around so that the delegate becomes the staff member. I'm on 3 committees that are very similar to this, and being the 3 wind farm committees at the moment, and it is very much about representation of the community by a councillor is the prime function, and the general manager, as I say, has suggested that it will revert after the election, and I think I would think that is exactly the way to go, because it's a more appropriate role for a councillor than it is for a member of staff. There are other ways that these organisations contact members of staff. They are not through the consultative committees and so on. So I commend Chris. I thank you for what you said, because I think what you implied there is that it would revert to a councillor being the prime delegate after the election, and I would suggest that is the best way to go.
Okay, I've got Councillor Jones and Councillor Harker.
Why don't we start how we mean to end up? And the reason why I say this is if you just read the minutes of this, you'd be like, oh, councillors don't care, they want to send staff. And I know that's not what we intend. So why don't we amend this, if I have the the agreeance of the mover and seconder, instead of saying with the councillor being the alternate delegate, to say until such time as the new council term delegation provides the opportunity to appoint a councillor.
Yeah, I'm happy to accept that as the mover.
Yeah, it just makes it clear what our intent is in the minutes and also future direction. Because there
I agree with them. Yep.
There are some that we actually end up having the council staff on for very specific reasons of their skill, whereas this, as Councillor Frost indicated, it really does need to be a community.
So if you say until council nominates a councillor.
Yeah. Until such time as council nominates a councillor to be the
as
delegate.
As
the delegate. Yep.
No,
No alternate.
Yeah.
How fast can you type? Okay, so Councillor Ferry and Councillor Reid are happy to accept that. Thank you. Councillor.
Yep.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So what I was going to ask is very much along with what Councillor Jones just did in terms of cleaning it up procedurally and making sure that the intent was captured, which I think you've just done perfectly.
Okay, thank you. If there is no other speakers for or against it, I'll put the motion as it stands. All those in favour?
Aye.
Everyone noting that there's two not in the room.
We get Councillor Turner.
So yes, get Councillor Turner, and would someone like to let Michael back in, or does he have to dial in, or we just let him in? Ali, Councillor Harker, they can just let him in.
Okay, I messaged him to say come back.
Okay. All right, is Councillor McManus? Yes, he's back here. All right, so there's no additional notices of motion and there's no questions with notice. And we don't seem to have any minutes of council committees, obviously due to a large amount of COVID problem and no one being able to meet face to face, but we will hopefully have some reports on the Memorial Hall and some of the other things maybe by next meeting.
Yes.
The Memorial Hall report is done and it's with the
Committee. Right, okay. Thank you. And so the Memorial Hall Committee, I'm sure, is on it and acting fast. Well, you are now, I've noticed that you are. Acting fast. Well, we want to make sure that we get to it so we can get on it with donations, applying for grants, all those sorts of things, and the remedial work, making decisions on important things like that, because I think that is something that does need to be brought forward. Okay, so then we're going to move to confidential matters that relate to tender evaluations and individuals and companies that are nominated within that. So moving into confidential, can I have someone move us into confidential? Thank you, Councillor Jones and Councillor Turner. All those in favour? Those?
Aye.
Thank you for those online who've been interested enough to watch the meeting. We'll now go into confidential, so we will end our live streaming at this point. Thank you.